friends. I want to start by saying that Leading Through Change is the exact title of a John Maxwell two-part podcast series on being a leader through change, and everything I'm going to talk about today comes from that podcast series. So why am I repeating what's already been said? First of all, there are no new ideas, but most importantly, because the content is brilliant. In my last video, I talked about adding value in your presentations, and I would say that you want to add value, right, in the rest of your life. If you want to be a leader or are a leader, John Maxwell will add value to your professional life, honestly. If you already know him, this is a reminder to reconnect with his many books and podcasts, many books and podcasts. And if you don't think this, and if you don't know, then this is the very smallest sampling of the leadership greatness that he gives the world. I'm involved right now in merging two companies, and the merger doubled everything about these companies. The impressive thing is that people at both companies are handling it extremely well, which is not necessarily typical, and I chalk that up to the cultures that had already been formed. The cultures at each company embrace growth, personal improvement, professional expansion, and the entire management team and people within the teams all show absolute respect for one another and their people. As you can imagine, change is far more difficult at companies without these cultures. So I wanted to delve into how you can create a culture like that in your own company or your own department. And I didn't want to just do it based on a case study. This is how I turned to Dr. John Maxwell. So what does he say about how to cultivate a company culture that responds well to change? First, foster and promote people who show a natural inclination for change. This is someone who he calls it a bias for change. So someone who's okay with change first and foremost should be someone that you're fostering, promoting, mentoring, collaborating with. So what does the person like this look like? Who shows a natural inclination for change? Here's what you should look for. They don't try to protect their own territory. They are committed to the big picture over their own turf. They possess a personal sense of security and self-worth. This is important because they'll be challenged. We're all challenged in change, and a person who doesn't have a strong sense of security or self-worth could make ego-based decisions as opposed to making the decisions that are best for the big picture, which goes to the previous point. They demonstrate passion, energy, stamina, because you have to stick with things through change. They're independent thinkers who are willing to verbalize what they really think and feel. And that's important also because there can be resentments if people don't express themselves, but also you're not getting the best ideas of people who aren't expressing themselves. And extra finger, they possess resilience that they can use to make mid-course corrections and also get back up after setbacks. So that is just the first one. That is about surrounding yourself with people who have a natural bias for change. The second factor, he says, in cultivating a company culture that responds well to change is to acknowledge the loss. Loss is the first step toward progress. And as you can imagine, the fear of loss is exactly what scares people about change. And that fear is the most important thing to combat. So how do you combat that fear? You have to identify who's losing what. Almost all people perceive change as loss. You have to accept the reality and importance of the losses, and I'm going to come back to that one. You have to acknowledge that you have to acknowledge the losses openly and also sympathetically. These are subjective losses to people, and they really cannot feel motivated if their anxiety is high. So knowing that when anxiety rises, motivation falls, you really want to lessen the anxiety, not just for the person, but so we can move on with this change process. So let's hone in on the subjective loss. An example from this merger is you have fully functioning, productive departments at two companies that will need to integrate. Now, from a high level, I can look at this integration, or a CEO could, and say this is a huge opportunity to take best practices from each company and take two great companies and make them one phenomenal company, right? Because you're doing the best of the best at each step. But you could also see the perspective that you have people in these departments who have helped develop very good processes. They know these processes and they know how to complete their tasks. Well, I see then at least two losses here. First, the loss of stability because now they might have to do something differently and they like the current way. And the loss of feeling competent because they have to learn something new. So in the scenario, the manager would want to combat the two losses they've identified. The first would be to create stability by getting the new processes documented extremely well. So there's really no doubt people can follow them easily. That's stability. And then also give words of affirmation to their people that they're doing great with the transition, that they're doing well at learning their new competencies, and thus they will begin to feel competent with the new process. All right, so the podcast actually describes 6 more factors in cultivating a company culture that responds well to change, but I'm going to share just 2 more of them. The next one is give people permission to make mistakes. This goes back to the competency part. People will likely be afraid of failure, and they might have a fear that they might get replaced. So mistakes happen, especially with something new. Be gracious about them. That will help a lot. And finally, reward individuals who think out of the box and can implement change. That was a direct quote from him. Reward individuals who think out of the box and can implement change. And I'm surprised that this was lumped into one item because it kind of describes 2 different people oftentimes. There are people on your team who have great ideas, and there are people on your team who can turn those ideas into reality. These are not always the same people, but I promise you, you need them both. You do not want yourself or the leadership team to be the only people allowed to come up with ideas because your future is about to get real stale real quick. New ideas change companies for the better. You also don't have the time to invest in implementing all of these changes. So if you don't foster people to show off their abilities in making change happen, your growth will be slow. Slow can be a killer of company growth, right? And company success. All right, that was a whirlwind. We'll link to the podcast below, and the next time we'll talk, it'll be about the levels or stages of change. So until then, go forth and find a new perspective on anything that isn't serving you.